Coming week's Parsha is Parsha Shlach. The subject is the spies who were sent to Israel. It's an interesting thing. The person who came out best in this whole story is Yehoshua. He and Caleb were the only two faithful spies, the ones who retained their sense of what Israel is, who Hashem is, what a promise means, and came back with good reports. But the mission itself was a disaster. Nonetheless, after Moshe's death, we find that when Yehoshua took over the leadership, he sent spies. Now, he'd be the last person in the world who I would have thought would send spies. I would assume that he would say, this is something that doesn't work, you have to go on faith. So when we look back at our Parsha, we have to ask really, what made it into a disaster? So there are different approaches. Ibn Ezra's approach, Ramban's approach. The approach that I would say works the best, though, in answering this question, as opposed to the many, many other questions that are opened by the nature of things, is that the spies that Moshe sent wanted to see that the land could be conquered without divine intervention. When they were coming with that attitude, then of course anything that would require divine intervention was frightening to them, was overwhelming to them. So their question had to do with, who are we? Who are we to deserve divine intervention? It says in the text, we were like grasshoppers in our own eyes. How could we expect this? Now this is a reasonable attitude. We're not supposed to, let's say, cross Tel Aviv highway blindfolded and say, of course a miracle should happen. I deserve a miracle. What if I don't? And even if I do, is that God's way of ruling the world? And even if it was, and even if I did, would that not diminish who I am as a person if I demand miracles as though they're my right? Why weren't the spies right? And they didn't lie. Let's not forget that. So the idea is that everybody has to maximize human efforts in what they do, with one exception. The one exception is in the face of a direct divine promise. In this case, not in other cases, in this case, where there was a divine promise where God's saying, I'm going to make it happen, where it was supposed to be all about Him, not all about us, then applying the rules that we would apply for other situations doesn't work. And this is why later, when Yehoshua was sending spies not to find out if, but how to strategize. Where should we go in first? The north, the south? Which city? And in the city Yericho, from what perspective? He was in a whole other place. His question wasn't, can God do it? His question wasn't, will He do it? His question is, what's my place here? So now let's take this to our own lives. Our question should be, and what should I be? Who should I be at this moment? When we take the question and make it into a question of desperation, if I'm not for me, then who's for me? Then we've taken God out. If conversely we say, I don't have to question anything about myself, I'll rely on God with closed eyes, we're taking away His purpose in creating us. We're here to say, who am I and what am I at this moment, and where's my place? If we do so, we'll be following Yehoshua's example, both in who he was in this Parsha and who he was later when he was leader. So have a good week.